Welcome everyone to the Sonoma County Community Wildfire Protection Plan update. This update was led by Permit Sonoma Fire Prevention Division with help from Fire Safe Sonoma, CAL FIRE, and our project contractor, Digital Mapping Solutions. It was funded by the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and administered by Cal OES. Next slide. Welcome, bienvenidos. Good evening and buenas noches. Again, this is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan public review meeting. Plan Comunitario de Protección Frente a los Incendios Forestales, Taller de la Revisión Pública. Next slide. So we do have Spanish interpretation available. If you do need that, please click on the interpretation button below on your screen. Select your language, and to listen only to that interpreted language, click on the mute original audio button. Okay, we're just going to do a quick review of Zoom. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A chat function. We'll make sure to address them during the Q&A portion of this evening. Well, you can also raise your hand if you have any questions during the presentation or during the Q&A. We'll try and get to your question during the presentation, but we might wait till we get to the Q&A section. When I do unmute you for your question, please state your name before asking any of your questions. So next slide. Tonight's meeting, the purpose of it is to make sure that we're engaging county residents in the review of the public draft of the Sonoma County CWPP and its meaningful implementation. Next slide. Meeting outcomes for tonight are just to make sure that county residents have a general understanding of what the CWPP includes and how it can be used, the wildfire risk index that was created for the CWPP, and understanding of the priority project list and project tracker, and how you can include projects into the CWPP. We're also going to go over how you can submit comments onto the public review draft. And the team will also receive any of your initial feedback if you've gone over the draft already. If not a problem. You still have until Sunday to do so. And we'll also be sure to incorporate any of your suggestions or edits as appropriate. So for tonight's meeting, this is the agenda. I've already gone through kind of the welcome. I will be introducing very shortly Carolyn Safford, but we'll get to that in a second. We'll do presentations, and then again, we'll have a robust Q&A section. And now on to our fearless project leader, Carolyn Safford.
Who has unmuted herself. Good evening, all. I'm Carolyn. I work with Permit Sonoma in the Fire Prevention Division. I have many different things that I do, but one of them has been completing this update of the Sonoma County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. This is an update from the 2016 plan, which I wrote in conjunction or for Fire Safe Sonoma way back then. Of course, that plan changed immediately after it was completed because 2017 was the dawn of a new era. So the Community Wildfire Protection Plan was originally defined in the United States Congress Healthy Forest Restoration Act in 2003. And it was defined with only 3 minimum requirements. And those are: 1, that it's developed collaboratively with input from all the stakeholders from federal, state, local agencies on down to and especially including individual community members and community groups. It has to identify areas for hazardous fuels reduction and recommend types and methods of treatment. And it needs to recommend measures to reduce the ignitability of structures. So that was all that they asked for when they defined this plan, which we go back and forth. Was that a really good idea or was that a really bad idea? But I think it's worked really well in many, many ways. So the overall purpose of the CWPP is to bring together all of these wildland-urban interface residents to collaboratively identify wildfire issues and risks and prioritize areas and strategies to reduce risk. A CWPP really needs to be thought of more of it as a pathway to solutions rather than a solution itself. It's not a regulatory document and it doesn't have any funding attached to it. What it does is it allows a place for people in the community or agencies to enter plans for which they may be seeking funding. And many funders, increasingly so, ask for a project to be listed in a CWPP to receive favor for funding. So it's more of a pathways to solutions than a solution itself. Other plans, other agencies work on evacuation plans and things like that. So that's sort of outside of the lane of the CWPP. So how we updated the CWPP. This is the second draft of the update. During the first draft, we held the development of the first draft. We had held meetings in all 5 supervisory districts, at least 2, and sometimes more. We had a steering committee who input into the draft as it was created, along with fire agencies and others. And then we went out for public comment, which we got a lot of. And so then we did a bunch of revision and outreach. So the comments that we received from agencies and the public, there were a lot of them. Every comment was reviewed and where feasible are reflected in the document. They were pretty wide ranging. There were comments concerning equity issues and how those were addressed in the plan, environmental concerns, funding needs, education, how we're going to implement the projects that we're talking about in the CWPP. That was a big one we'll be talking about more later. There were a lot of comments about the document itself. And so as much as we could, we really tried to do what people asked. And one of the things that people asked for over and over was, they said, this thing is really, really long. Can you make it shorter? And so we did. It's just more concise. Don't think we took much substantive information out, but we did try to make it more concise and less repetitive. So that is a good thing. And we did add a chapter to define what are the processes and procedures that we're going to use as we move towards figuring out how to implement suggested projects across the county. The second draft went through extensive review, again, from our county internal teams and from the steering committee. And we now have this version, which hopefully many of you have already taken a look at, which is posted on our website. The CWPP is basically, there's 2 parts to it. There is what we call the print version, although it's probably going to mostly live in a digital world. That is where we're asking for input, and we'll be talking more about that. And then there is the interactive story map and hub site, which is where all of our maps that we'll be talking about reside, and the priority project entry tool lives there. So lots and lots of things live on the hub site. So these are really both the CWPP. They're part and parcel. So the CWPP is a comprehensive resource to help residents understand risks and undertake wildfire risk reduction work on public and private lands by hardening structures, reducing flammable vegetation in residential and wildland areas, preparing for emergency. And we really, really hope that it's going to work to encourage collaboration between residents, groups, and agencies across the county. So this is our great hope for the document, and all of that will work much better with all of your input. One of the most important things that we did for the CWPP was create this wildfire risk index. The Wildfire Risk Index is a GIS map, which provides, it's a very high level model that provides relative wildfire risk. It is not intended for or suitable for parcel level determinations. The county is divided up into 100 acre polygons. And within each of those polygons, there's a ton of room for conditions to be quite different. So you don't want to take a look at this and see that oh my house is in the red. You need to look at all of the individual parts on the site to use it for determination. It's for broad brush strokes. The value of this analysis is that we can use it to identify overall trends, which can then be used to suggest the need for and nature of measurements that can be taken to reduce risk to acceptable levels. Detailed explanation of the wildfire risk index and the hazard index upon which this was based is in Chapter C, as well as one of the chapters in the document. Appendix C has a very detailed analysis of all of the data inputs that went into creating these maps. So again, those live on the CWPP hub site and web map. Here's the project list is also there. So that's where, when we get this ready for Hollywood, you'll be entering your projects in this top left corner. The wildfire risk index is here, the third from the left on the top row. But the one that I'd like to call out to kind of discuss a little bit this evening, because it's really cool and it's a really important thing to know about, is this Sonoma County WRI statistics thing. This is awesome tool for any of you who want to plan projects. So when you go and click that icon, this is the map that will open up, the base map. And what you're seeing here is these are the projects that were entered last year in 2021 during the CWPP process. And there will be more on that later. And one of the first things you'll want to do is know that up here in the top left, there's a little thing that looks like a bunch of stacks of paper. This is the layer tool. And if you click on that, you'll get this menu popping up with all of these little checkboxes that you can turn on or off. So you might want to get in there, as I did, and turn off the project layers. So see, all those individual projects are gone. I've turned on the WRI layer so I can see now what the risk index says. And now, cooler yet, if you go up into the top right corner, you see there's this sort of exclamation point tool. And if you click on that, what'll happen is this little menu will pop up across the bottom of the screen. And this is where the drawing tools are. And what those have is, this is a point. You can put a point in there. You can use this little pen tool to randomly draw an area. Or this is the one I use most often. You can use the polygon tool to kind of, you can follow along property lines and click and click and click. And so you can get a really specific parcel in there. And here's an example. I blew up the, I expanded using the plus tool. I increased the magnification so you can kind of see what's going on. And I grabbed this completely random area and clicked around until I got this. Now, what this delivers for me on that bottom row is lots of data about the whole parcel taken in as a whole. This shows the average wildfire risk index within a 1 mile buffer, and ember load index, total number of structures, average road risk. This second tab, this is the population statistics, so it's over here, gives you exactly how many people live in there, how many of them are below poverty level, how many of them are older folks. So it gives you a lot of data that you can use to create grant applications. The last of those tools, which is over here, parcels impacted. This is really awesome, because what this is every APN, every assessor's parcel number that's in this polygon that I created. So you can get all of those APNs. It also shows you where those APNs are on the map. So as a tool to help you plan projects, this is just a really good thing to know about. So I wanted to include this quick trip through there. So the CWPP is divided up into 7 chapters, and I'm just going to run through and quickly say what's in each of them. Chapter 1 is sort of about the CWPP, what the requirements are for the CWPP, processes and procedures and things like that. Chapter 2 is a demographic overview of the county, a discussion of the WUI, what it is in Sonoma County, fire service organization, land use and ownership, building and defensible space codes and regulations, things like that are all in chapter 2. Chapter 3 has wildfire history, and then goes into depth in what we call house outwards risk reduction strategies, which is stuff like hardening structures to resist ember ignition and direct heat ignition. So a lot of discussion about structure hardening, defensible space, and preparedness are all in chapter 3. Wildland ecosystems is chapter 4, where we're talking about wildfire in Sonoma County's wildland environments, fire regimes, effect of fire on natural landscapes, things like that. Chapter 5 is wildfire hazard and risk assessment. So this is a kind of a brief explanation of how that wildfire risk assessment that we were discussing earlier was created. And again, if you go to Appendix C, that's the techie version. Chapter 6, risk reduction priorities, is a really important chapter and one we'll be discussing in the next couple of slides. And the things that are in chapter 6 are the risk reduction priorities as identified by all of the folks who came to our 16 meetings that we had for the first round of the CWPP, input from the agencies, and we kind of chewed them all up and put a list of the overall risk priorities and a list of projects as suggested during the meetings in that chapter. So it's a good one to take a look at. Chapter 7 is our implementation chapter. Okay, we've got these priorities, we've got these projects, how do we get them on the ground? So this is our discussion of how we might make that happen. Chapter 8 has all the appendices in there, many in there. So chapter 6, these CWPP risk reduction priorities. So again, what we did is in those meetings, we asked people, what are your values? What are you most concerned about protecting? How do you want to protect them? And we tried to distill all of that input down into these categories. And I'm not going to read through all of these entirely, but I really do encourage you to go through and take a look at these. But they include projects that support access and functional needs population, non-English speakers, people with disability, low income, defensible space projects, community education of all sorts, preparedness of all sorts, community level planning like development of local CWPPs or creation of fire-wise communities. Biomass utilization. There were all kinds of things that are in here that were sort of the overall priorities as suggested by people in the county that we're using as the basis to evaluate projects as they come in. So speaking of projects as they come in, these are, again, the projects that were entered in 2021 during the open drop your project in part of the program. We allowed these projects to be listed in the CWPP completely as described by those seeking funding. And projects received a ranking score based on the parameters, including how many of the risk reduction priorities in the CWPP were addressed in this project. Several issues, this is a learning process for us as well. Several issues arose from this. For example, we did find that using, like how many of these is your project doing, which is what we were doing. We were giving these a value of 1. So if you had a project that had access and egress and community preparedness and education, you got 3 points, right? And what we realized was that having a whole bunch of values that you're addressing doesn't necessarily make a project a better project. So we needed to find a better way to evaluate those projects. Another issue that came up, there were a couple of very large projects that were largely in the property owned by somebody who hadn't been consulted about that project. And that was problematic. And so we've had to, we're coming up with new ways to deal with how you, the folks living out there, get your projects listed in the CWPP. So where we're getting to is a sort of a new system. Another one of the comments that we got, there were a lot of questions. It was pretty relatively time consuming to enter projects into the project list. So what we've done is we've created sort of a dual system. We have the easy button system, as we're calling it now, which is these are really broad project ideas. You'll go onto the map, you'll draw a pretty vague project boundary and briefly describe what it is that you want to do, how you want to do it, where it is, maybe who's involved, so that we get these broad project parameters. And we're really hoping that we'll be able to use those to bring people together to collaboratively develop really good projects across the county. So that's the easy button. That'll be, you can enter your project ideas in there. There's also going to be another button that's going to be a little more work to get in. And that's if you have a fully developed project, which is you have a budget developed, you've considered CEQA, you've considered getting, how are you going to get all those landowner permissions? You've done all of the stuff that you need to do a complete grant proposal. So this will be a more difficult entry, but it will be a stronger recommend probably from the CWPP. When those projects go in, they will be evaluated by an evaluation committee. Membership may include members from a variety of technical advisory committees that have sprung up across the county, agencies, non-governmental organizations, and a variety of stakeholders in order to provide a really broad spectrum of expertise and viewpoints. Analysis will include alignment to the CWPP risk reduction priorities as identified in Chapter 6 and the overall risk in the project area. We'll also be pulling in other mapping and planning tools, such as the Wildfire Resilience Planner, which is under development through the University of California Cooperative Extension and Sonoma Water. These can be used to data up multiple benefits, environmental benefits and other things that don't necessarily get represented in the Wildfire Risk Index. So that will all go into that evaluation. Until the evaluation process is complete, projects entered in the tracking tool or project entry portal will remain hidden from public view. After evaluation, eligible projects will be visible on a public map and listed in a CWPP, listed in the project list in Appendix A of the CWPP. So some of the really important things that'll come out of this, and we're excited about this process. After evaluation, we can then do, with the panel of experts that we have assembled, a trend and gap analysis. That way we can look to see, are certain geographic areas over or under represented? Are there areas with really high risk where there's no projects? Are there areas where we have 5 projects in exactly the same footprint? So we can kind of look at all of that stuff. We can look at how many large-scale vegetation projects are in here versus projects that address structure hardening and defensible space. And do we need to encourage more of the other kind of projects to be created and entered by the folks out there as well as agencies? Are access and functional needs populations in low income areas adequately represented? We're really hoping that having this process in place is going to greatly encourage collaboration. It'll provide for technical assistance. So if we see a really great project, but maybe they don't really know how to handle the CEQA yet, or they really need help with this or that, we can push those awesome projects towards technical assistance so that they can make a good idea a great project. So that's what we're all hoping to do. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is do something that was asked that we do by the government's Forest Management Task Force in their California's Wildfire and Forest Resilient Action Plan, which is to, quote, increase local and regional government's capacity to build and maintain a pipeline of forest health and fire prevention projects. We need this pipeline of projects so that when money becomes available, we can go back and we can say, yeah, we have 6 projects that are ready to go. Please throw your dollars our way. This is really important. And having those projects map both the broad project areas and the specifics and projects underway will give us a much better sense of what's going on in the county. That's been a heavily stressed need by everybody who works in this wildfire space, is there is no one place where everybody can go and see all of the projects listed in one place. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with the project tracker. List projects from 2021 are still listed on the draft map and in Appendix A. We'll be reaching out to those who entered those projects to see if they want to have the project evaluated and listed in the tracker and on the map. We will ask for and greatly appreciate your patience as we are kind of breaking new ground on developing this system for how do we evaluate projects moving forward from here. This is a larger ask than most counties are doing in their CWPPs, but we really want to make sure that your projects, the community projects, are part of the community wildfire protection plan. How's my sound? Are you picking up? Okay. There's a vacuum in the background. This is where you will go to enter your CWPP project when you're ready to do so. We're asking that if you have a project that you think you're going to want to enter into the tracker, you can send us your email address. We're collecting a list of those so that as soon as the data entry portals are ready for this, we can pop you an email and you can jump in. And this is where it all is. Okay.
All right. Well, tonight was the last public review meeting that we have planned for the CWPP. At this point, what we're going to be doing is implementing your guys' public comments and suggestions on the draft. Again, those are due this Sunday, December 4th. I'm going to say this quite a few times just to really emphasize the importance of getting your comments and suggestions on this draft. We'll also be adding any more projects into the story map at this point. And then we're just going to be working on it throughout December until we bring it to the board. But next slide. So how you're going to comment on the public draft. I already put in the chat and I'll list it again after the presentation, but just go to the Permit Sonoma website for the CWPP. And then you'll see in this big, box, a link to the public draft. You'll click on that link. And then on the right-hand side of the draft, you'll see a little add a comment box. It won't be there at first. If you just put your mouse on there, it'll pop up. So that's how you go ahead and comment. Next slide. In case you don't want to leave your comments on the Google Doc, not a problem. We're going to ask you to still use the Google link just as a reference, but we'll send you a template to add your comments in, and then you can, send your revisions back to us. If that's how you want to do it, just email us at permitsonoma-wildfireplan@sonoma-county.org. And again, I'll put all of these links in the chat once we're done. Next slide. Carly-Ann, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this one. We definitely want your comments. That's why you're here and we're here. But we would like to ask that you keep your comments as concise as you can. Really, really, really long comments are just difficult to pull apart and figuring out where this goes and how it goes. So the more concise your comments are, the easier that is for us. And we just also wanted to say that, you know, we're really striving to integrate community values and ideas while balancing multiple viewpoints and sticking to the requirements of the CWPP, which are collaboration, identify hazardous fuels, and recommend measures to treat structural ignitability. So that is overall what we're trying to do with the document. So comment away, but if as much as possible, please remain concise.
Okay, so again, comments are due this Sunday, December 4th. Once the public review period is over, we'll be working on the draft, integrating comments as you know they are appropriate to the CWPP. We'll then present it to the Board of Supervisors in February of next year. Once we've presented it and they've signed off, we'll annex the CWPP into the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan during that next update for the MJHMP. We'll also be sure to maintain and project review any new local CWPPs, projects, updated mapping links as developed in the appendices, you know, until the next round of updates for the CWPP. Next slide. So again, please, I cannot stress this enough. Comment, make your suggestions known. We would really appreciate it. There's a link, but I will, you know, put the links up in the chat soon. Next slide. Okay, so it's now the Q&A portion of this evening. Again, if you have any, we have a couple questions already, Carol, that I'm going to be throwing your way. If anyone wants to talk live, just raise your hand up. I'll unmute you. But see, the first question I have for Carol is, I believe this is from Tom. I believe Carol said that biomass utilization was identified as a priority for project selection. Was biomass carbon sequestration, also considered a priority? If not, why not? Particularly considering this is a key element of the county's climate mobilization strategy and CARB's new scoping study. You're muted, Carol.
Can I stay muted for this one? This one's hard.
Also, before Carol starts, just want to introduce Roberta McIntyre and Sashi Sabarantandam. I'm so sorry.
No problem. We didn't practice this.
And Kim Batchelder. They're all here to help Carol answer any questions. They've also been pretty big in helping write the CWPP as well.
Let me amend that to say they have all been lifesavers in getting this moving forward. It's been tough. So the biomass utilization, what we were addressing in that was more development of procedures for creating biochar or other innovative ways of moving cut materials from projects, so that we're not just leaving that on the ground or chipping it or doing whatever else. So it was developing those innovative strategies for dealing with the byproducts of fuels management in the landscape. And again, if you've already looked at this, there's a little more explanation about what that is in chapter 6.1. Carbon sequestration for carbs we did not directly address that. I think that tends to be more of a forestry issue. I think that is worth considering. I would be interested to see if any of the other panelists have an idea about that, but that's something that we could discuss. I have never quite understood how the carbon calculations work, and I've tried. So exactly how we would integrate that into the CWPP as a practical matter, I'm I'm just not sure.
Can mind if I chime in there, Carleon?
No.
Yeah, so in my opinion, it's outside the scope of this particular report. This report is meant to focus on structural ignitability. And, you know, we do not take climate change lightly, but when we start talking about climate change and, you know, greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration, however you pronounce that, it gets weird for us as, you know, for me in particular personally, as a you know, a member helping to create this plan, because we want to, you know, our heart of hearts keep telling us, and Carleon can speak to this as well. We both experience this where we go like, that's really important, we need to pull it in, but then we have to step back and remind ourselves, that's not what this plan's about. This plan is about reducing structural ignition. We want to do that as well as we can, taking climate change and the climate effects, impacts, et cetera, into consideration. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, this plan is meant to speak to reduction of structural ignition. That's kind
And hazardous fuels and reduction of hazardous
Mhm.
fuels.
yeah, predominantly structural ignition. If you look at, you know, there's a handbook that many of us use in preparing these plans. It's called Preparing a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, a handbook for wild and urban interface communities. And within that document, it states the fundamental goal, and I'm quoting, the fundamental goal is to establish community hazard reduction priorities and recommendations to reduce structural ignitability. And that is a standalone step. It's step 6 in the process, according to that handbook. There's no step 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 that speaks to, you know, fuels reduction specifically. So really, fundamentally, it's structural ignitability. And then, yeah, fuels reduction folds into that, but it really speaks little about the climate piece.
Thanks.
Tom added a follow-up there in the Q&A where he says, thanks, Carleon. Perhaps a placeholder for future sequestration value as one of the utilization paths for biomass could be put in the CWPP edition in anticipation of the county's upcoming CO2 sequestration inventory and implementation plans. Just a suggestion. Definitely appreciate Tom, I think, is a very tends to be very constructive. So Tom, I want to give you some appreciation for that. And then just kind of adding to what Roberta and Carleon said, the goals of a CWPP are to figure out how a community's particular values are and priorities are around hazardous fuel reduction and structural ignitability. So hazardous fuel reduction is going to involve removing hazardous fuel, which carbon sequestration is about the mass. So there's going to be some removal of mass. So what you do with that mass is where that biomass utilization piece comes into play, where Carleon mentioned that. But the amount of touch, how heavily and how often and when and where and all those things, those nuances will come up at the project level. And so I think you had a good suggestion, Tom, of how to have that be in there as a consideration for people who are actually doing a project. And I don't know if Kim, you want to, if we want to not go down this rabbit hole any further, we can, but Kim probably has some input on that at the project level too.
Yeah, I think it's too much in the weeds to be going into that conversation, but I appreciate the question. I think it's really trying to remember what the context of the CWPP is, and that this is to essentially encompass all the work that's going on in the county, which is quite extensive. But again, the evaluation will take all those things into consideration when we think about funding opportunities.
We also have a live question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute. Craig, are you on?
Okay, unmuted.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys. First off, thank you very much for this. This is an enormous document, and I can't wait till it's ready for my neighbors to actually read, because it's kind of like this all in one place handbook for so many topics. So I understand it's huge, and thank you very much for all that effort.
Thank you, Craig.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. My first real question is about the project list, and I understand that the currently the 2022 projects are not listed in the document as it's a work in progress. And I just wanted to make double sure that we will have a chance to review the updated project list before this thing is put to print.
You know, I think that really, we can certainly try to make it, we're up against a couple of pretty horrendous deadlines
Okay.
on this project, frankly.
Yep.
And Kim and folks from Natural Resources Division at Permit Sonoma, and Sashi and a bunch of us are really working on the nuts and bolts of how are we going to make this work?
Right.
And pulling together that evaluation committee.
Yep.
My guess is that it's going to be really, really tight.
Okay.
Once we get those projects in. I would say keep checking back on the website. And
Yeah.
we'll, as soon as they have been evaluated,
Yeah.
we'll pop them up. My guess too, Craig, and I'm guessing this, I'm not guaranteeing it or promising a thing. I'm guessing we may end up with 2 rounds of project entry this year. As we're prepping people for in the future, we'll probably have one deadline, get your projects in either in the easy button bucket or the hard bucket. But I'm guessing that we might end up throwing a second round of project entry because I'm not sure how fast the word's going to get out that people need to get their projects in by February.
Got it.
So it is a work in progress. It is enormously complex and complicated.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for your patience and your kind words.
Well, no problem. But when you say check the website, you mean the actual draft document of the CWPP or the website, the planning tool? Because we're already in the planning tool, and maybe that is good enough. I just we're kind of very excited to be a part of the plan, and I would hate.
So you already have a project you entered in 2021.
Probably it was 2022. Well, actually, we did 2021 as well. We're on the map and we're in the thing. We're
Okay.
just the list
So
of documents and the.
so long as you gave us a good email.
Yeah. Okay.
You can expect to be hearing from us. And I actually just today, I downloaded all of those projects into a spreadsheet.
Okay.
And we're going to start that evaluation process to start really looking at, we are using those projects as a beta test to look at, okay, what are the parameters for evaluation that we're going to set up for this? So we'll be looking at those projects and expect to see an email from us, which will say, do you want your project to be re-entered into the next round? And then it will, if we can, we'll port them over. We're not sure if we can technically, if we can do it. But if we can, we'll port them over. If we can't, we'll ask you to re-enter them.
Okay, great. Well, we're very excited. We would love to be able to participate on that.
And if you have any questions about that,
Oh,
email the CWPP list too.
yep, I did, and I will do that again. These next questions are kind of a little bit more elective. So if you guys are in need to move on, let me know. But my first one is the Wildfire Risk Index is really great. But if I understand it correctly, it's kind of an internal type of a system right now. In other words, no insurance company is going to look at that and say, oh, well, this means you're in a high area, or
so insurance companies have their own models,
right,
and that is what they use. Highly unlikely they're going to anybody who's outside of the context of like folks wanting to do work in the county are going to use it. Because the insurance companies, they have their own risk models,
right,
and they're not going to use ours.
Okay, well, I think yours is great, and I love the level of detail in it. I'm just trying to get a handle on how to promote it to my neighbors.
Yeah, and it is a broad level analysis.
Yeah, but
it's much more specific than the other hazard CAL FIRE, for example. The CAL FIRE fire hazard severity zones are way broader than this, because that's a statewide model. This
Yep.
was developed for the county. So yeah, I think it's a valuable tool, but it is for broad analysis, not for parcel specific recommendations.
Well, I've already found it very helpful in helping, kind of focus some discussions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Project description tools. This is from a while ago, but have you upgraded it in any way to be able to do either multi-polygons or import shape files, or you're just too darn busy with all the stuff you're already doing?
Importing shape files. Somebody make a note of that because I'll make sure that we can figure out how to make that happen. That was problematic last year.
Yep.
We have a new team working on the hub site and how all that's working.
Okay.
And that's a perfect question for her. My guess is that that doesn't seem like it should be a heavy lift. So
Well,
I'm hoping that will get easier.
I think
Thank
that
you for
might
bringing that
help
up.
out a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, last question is the GIS data availability. Is any of this awesome information on that? I don't see the ability place anywhere to download any of that. Sonoma's really good about that data. Are there any plans to just put on a little bit of a hook to say, oh, well, give me this, wildfire risk index data, please?
I think you can get the data.
Okay.
My relationship to GIS is that I love the people who do it, and
Yep.
I'm not one of them.
Okay.
So if you can send me an email, Craig,
I'll you guys
telling
up
me
there.
the layers that you want,
Yep.
I can track down if you can get them and how to get them.
Okay, awesome.
But-
Well, that's it for me. So back to you guys, and thanks again.
And
Thank you.
Roberta, your hand is up. Did you want to?
Oh,
Yeah, I wanted to respond to one of Craig's questions, not to Craig, but to the team. I think we talked about possibly doing a couple workshops down the road to show people how to, give them some hints on how to craft a good project and how to enter them into the portal. And I wanted to see if that was still on the table.
Roberta, since you're talking, there was a question about how the local CWPPs connect to this CWPP and how people can find access to that. I posted a link to the Cloverdale CWPP because they asked for that, but I posted it to the story map is what I found. So you might have a better link that you might be able to send. So if the two of you want to talk about how the local CWPPs relate to this one.
The Cloverdale plan it's on the hub site. So if you just scroll all the way down to the bottom of the hub site, you'll see all of those local plans, which we do consider to be integrated into the CWPP. So they should all be on the hub site. We just got one yesterday from Healdsburg that we'll be entering on as soon as possible. And that'll go on to the CWPP map, and those local CWPPs are listed. Roberta, that sounds like a really good project for Fire Safe Sonoma to take the lead on. Is what's a good project look like, and how do you do it, and how do we get it into the system? So let's hunt as a pack. I think Kim might have some input on that, and all of us. So that's a qualified yes.
I wanted to respond to the CWPP question, local versus Sonoma County version. And it's an excellent question because what the local CWPP is really helping us to do is prioritize those projects. But usually those are jam-packed with as many projects as there are people in the room. So what we would like all authors and communities who are developing their local CWPP is to think about selecting your top 3 to 5 projects and submit those into the project selector tracker once you get to that point. But really be thoughtful in this first round, because that's what the evaluation committee is going to be looking at, is trying to think about those top 3 to 5 projects per local CWPP. I also wanted to give a plug for the value of both the local CWPP and the county-wide CWPP, and that is the U.S. Forest Service has a tremendous amount of funding over the next 5 years to support either the development of those CWPPs or, more importantly, the implementation of those projects. So those are the types of buckets of funding that we really want to attract to Sonoma County and want to help facilitate the ability to access those funds to be able to implement as many projects as possible.
Nice, thanks, Kim. We have a question from Larry. Is the goal to reduce the potential for wind-blown high-severity fires? If so, I do not see factors of wind or shade / moisture. If vegetation management results in any / either or both of these unintended consequences result giving rise to potentially more severe wildfires. Where has this been evaluated or prevented in the document? For clarification, my comment is meant for areas outside homes and communities.
We encourage very strongly throughout the document that all projects consider environmental factors in their design. How people design their projects and whether or not those projects get funded is a step beyond what we're looking at. I think that everybody wants to see those environmental factors considered. The CWPP is not the document to say this is good, this is not good. That's foresters do that. Sachi?
I think, Larry, please clarify if I'm misinterpreting your question, but I think that maybe what he was getting at too is what's in the risk index. So I don't know if you wanted to maybe address that because the wind factors are.
Yes,
in this.
wind is in there.
Yeah, it definitely is. So didn't want you to miss the opportunity. And Larry, please, if I'm misinterpreting your question, please clarify that or raise your hand or whatever. But Carolina, if you want to talk about how wind is considered in the risk and hazard index.
Yeah, wind is definitely in the hazard index, which is, so hazard is risk as it, or hazards that exist on the landscape itself that are, so that would,
sorry.
oh, that would be wind, slope, fuels. The easiest way to consider the difference between hazard and risk in my little tiny mind is hazard is a shark swimming in the ocean. Risk is a shark swimming in the ocean with a person swimming above the shark. So that's the difference between the hazard and the risk index. And wind is in the base data for the risk index. To which,
Yeah.
go ahead, Larry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So that's located. Which section of the document can you point me to that would discuss or indicate the wind factors?
Take a look at Appendix C,
Okay.
which is where the more detailed descriptions of the data inputs for the hazard index reside.
Okay. And then the other factor is the shade components and the retention of moisture within forest areas is a very important component for low severity fires, typical fires. And so has that been evaluated, or is that a component that is that you have evaluated and utilize in the document?
No. I'm sure that there's a lot of studies that have been done that address that. My position is we want projects to be both functional for reducing risk of fire intensity and fire spread, and we want them to be environmentally sensitive and consider those factors.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
that would like argue for shaded fuel breaks.
Yes, yes. And so it also, from a comment you made previously, these projects will be ultimately okayed or evaluated by what entity, and maybe will they be open to public comment as well?
I don't, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
So come back for further news.
Okay.
Tim, you
I
bravely
was just
took your
going to
mute
mention
off.
that the point of our that Carleone made earlier about the evaluation committee, it will consist of a wide range of professionals, and those who have fire ecology experience, from those who are also interested in protection of threatened and endangered species, as well as habitats that shouldn't be disturbed in any way. And so one of the, we're being able to use a number of new tools, such as the wildfire resilience planner, the wildfire fuel mappers. These things are all helping us to really understand where are the areas that we should apply treatments to. So all those are taken into consideration when we're going to be evaluating these different types of projects.
Yeah, well, that sounds gives me a little bit more confidence, and in the way that when you're looking at a number of people from profession, especially forest ecologist and fire ecologist, fire specialist, I think this is gives me better confidence that we're going to see a better valuation of the different projects that come forward, and happy to hear that.
Larry, and just as a broad stroke, for the purposes of the CWPP, the evaluation is projects that would be included in the CWPP need to be in alignment with the priorities that were collaboratively developed by the community, and that's really the evaluation from the point of view of the CWPP. There's no notion of whether or not these should be funded by whom and how and what they should be done. Like it's just does it align with the priorities that the community has determined for the CWPP? And then beyond that, being included in a CWPP is often a requirement for federal funding and other grant funding. So then those project sponsors could then go and try to get funding for something and develop it a little bit further and go forward from there. Kim manages a grant program through the Ag and Open Space District with PG&E settlement dollars. He's going to have a set of criteria. CAL FIRE is going to have a set of criteria. So beyond that, the CWPP doesn't really, care about anything further beyond does it align with those priorities.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Said. Thank you, Sashi. That was what I was trying to spit out. And also Roberta answered a lot of the questions about how the wind data was developed. It's in the chat, which I don't think you can see.
No, it's only in the chat. I only have access to the chat for
Right, and I don't think I can. Can I put in a question?
I'll go ahead and put the extreme fire weather potential, Roberta.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah, I was gonna tell Larry, if you go to the CWPP hub site on the county's hub site, and if you go down, scroll down a little bit, you'll see a box that says, it's really cool. If you go to the box, it says Sonoma County Wildfire Risk Index. If you click on that box, it'll take you to the WRI information. And there's a tab across the top ribbon that says, how is the WRI calculated? It goes into a lot of detail about where the data came from to generate the modeling that goes into all this. It's pretty incredible. A lot of names you'll probably recognize did a lot of work on it. And it's really amazing.
I'm just going to pop that up. So on the hub site, there's a lot of description of the hazard index on this button. So if you click this, and Roberta was just talking to you, can also get a lot of that in the risk index, which is that one. So all that data is in there, and you can read a lot about that, as well as in Appendix C and Chapter 4, or whatever that chapter is.
It's, in my opinion, it's way better than the Fire Mapper and 1,000,000 times better than what CAL FIRE has publicly available right now.
Speaking of CAL FIRE, thanks, Larry, for your question. We have a question from Paul. Does your wildfire risk calculation utilize existing CAL FIRE hazard data? If so, you must know that the CAL FIRE data dates from 2007. We are close to getting a whole state reevaluation of fire hazards. Will these then be included in your risk calculation?
the, that's built in, so you can turn that layer on and off throughout the project. So we have the fire hazard severity zoning as part of the mapping. But we don't have the data yet. No one's seen it yet. So we are well aware of the terrible timing of getting that new data published. We were hoping that that would be done before the CWPP finished up, but it isn't. So that is one of the things that we will need to update as soon as those have been approved and are finalized, which they are not yet.
That said, the CAL FIRE severity zones are much broader. The underlying data that was used to develop the risk index were developed much finer scale data for Sonoma County and analyzed by Tuckman Geospatial. So Sonoma County has way better and finer scale data than a lot of places. CAL FIRE is covering the whole state. So even if it doesn't include the most up-to-date CAL FIRE fire hazard severity zones, it actually considers a considerably finer scale data and more information and finer analysis than is meant to be considered in the CAL FIRE severity data.
All right, we're at time. Although I don't know if panelists have time to do at least one more question. It's from Tom. Will the CWPP be articulating any healthy forest specific objectives, or are only hazardous fuels reduction and structure hardening objectives being considered? The enabling 2003 federal legislation for CWPPs includes healthy forest requirements for preserving 1, large trees, and 2, old growth forests. For extensive outside-in projects, why doesn't this CWPP have any restrictions to protect large trees here in Sonoma County?
The CWP doesn't have restrictions per se, wouldn't you say, Caroline?
Yeah, I think that this is the same answer that Sachi gave a minute ago. There is, I think, a pretty robust amount of attention on healthy forest ecosystems throughout the plan. It's nobody who has worked on this plan wants to clear cut. That is not what this is about. It's about reducing risk to acceptable levels, especially near communities. And it's about doing that in a way that benefits the environment. And
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are way smarter about this than I am, but for the larger projects where CEQA is required, wouldn't a lot of that fold into the CEQA criteria and reporting anyway?
To some extent, because it would indicate what the impacts are. But I think that what Tom's saying and kind of what Larry is saying is just reflecting an overall concern about hazardous fuels reduction being a little overzealous I'm hearing a desire to balance the risk reduction with some, retaining of a heterogeneous, forest with old trees and young trees and different types, and with making sure that people don't go too far, do too much too soon. So I think what this is reflecting is a bunch of those concerns, and the CWPP, I think, is at a much broader level than that. So maybe what we could do here and maybe offline is to figure out what's a better way for people who have those concerns. I know a lot of people in the community have those concerns, to be a part of the conversation of how some of these things might be executed. And those would be at the project level, which the CWPP isn't going to really get into. But this group and maybe others could think about how could people who have those concerns be able to express them in a way to be able to influence how those projects, how that actually happens, not how, that risk should be reduced. I think everybody agrees, but how and at what pace and at what speed is what the I believe the concern is.
Thank you, Sashi. All right, everyone, we are past 7. So I'm gonna go ahead and just thank you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. If you have any more questions, feel free to email us at wildfireplan@sonoma-county.org. And please, 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 again, comment on that public draft. Links right there. Or you can go to permitsonoma.org/Sonoma County-CWPP. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.